Shalom and welcome back to the Ministry of Yeshua. I'm glad that you're here to learn the Word of God with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Kedoshim. We'll explore its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Leviticus 19:1 through 20:27, which will lead us to Amos 9:7 through 15, as well as Mark 12:28 through 34. And we'll start with the Torah portion summary. So once again, except on leap years, Kedoshim is read together on the same Sabbath with the previous reading Acharei Mot. Parsha Kedoshim contains the laws of holiness. It begins with a commandment, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." The rest of Leviticus 19 contains practical commandments that describe how to live a holy life. The laws of holiness include respecting father and mother, keeping the Sabbath, avoiding idolatry, making provision for the poor and needy, dealing honestly with others, practicing integrity, showing respect for disabled, judging others fairly, giving others the benefit of the doubt, refusing to be a gossip, loving your neighbor as yourself, avoiding forbidden mixtures, laws of agriculture, prohibitions on piercing, tattooing, shaving, and cutting one's flesh, prohibitions on witchcraft and occult practices, showing honor to the elderly, practicing kindness to the stranger in your midst, and using only honest weights and measures. These are the types of everyday things that define what holiness looks like practically. When we practice these laws, they set us apart from the rest of society. Leviticus 20 continues with the laws of holiness, warning against the occult and the idolatrous cult of Molech. After concluding the list, the Torah says, "You shall consecrate yourself, therefore, and be holy. For I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my statutes and practice them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you." Leviticus 27 through 8. The chapter ends with a list of punishments and curses that are to fall upon those who sin in secret against the laws of the Torah. The last verses again remind Israel not to follow the traditions of the Canaanites and that the people are to distinguish between clean and unclean animals. Israel is to be holy for God because He is holy. And so what is Kedoshim? The 30th reading from the Torah and the 7th reading from Leviticus is named Kedoshim, which means holy. The title comes from the words in Leviticus 19:2, which says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Leviticus 19 describes the holy community through a series of specific commandments, and Leviticus 20 warns against the snares of sexual immorality and idolatry, mandating a death penalty for certain sins. We'll talk about the holy community. "Speak to all congregation of the sons of Israel and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Leviticus 19:2. Have you ever wondered, what does a holy person look like? Do you picture a priest or a nun? Maybe a preacher. Perhaps you imagine a Hasidic Jew with a full beard, side locks, and a black hat. Leviticus 19:20 contains the Bible's description of what holiness looks like. The Lord told Moses to speak to the entire congregation of children of Israel, not just the priests, not just the elders, not just a portion of the community, but the entire congregation. He was to tell them, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Leviticus 19:2. So giving this commandment to the entire congregation indicates that real holiness requires a community effort. We tend to think of a holy man as a unique individual of exceptional piety who stands out from the common laity of the religious community. It is true that we are each called to walk in personal holiness, but there is also a corporate holiness that God sets before us. According to the Torah, every man in the holy community is supposed to be a holy man. Holiness is not a specific calling for a few pious individuals. It is a mandate for all God's people. The laws of Leviticus 19:20 are the instructions for how to achieve that goal. They are the laws of holiness. So rather than to try to comment briefly on all the laws, we will spend the majority of our time examining a few particular laws that relate to our interpersonal relationships. One of the most important ones is to fear your parents. And it says, every one of you shall reverence his mother and his father, Leviticus 19:3. The commandment to reverence mother and father could be more literally translated to say, every one of you shall fear his mother and his father. Why should we be afraid of our parents? When the Bible tells us to fear God, it means that we should always be conscious that he rewards obedience and punishes sin. Behaviors reap consequences, right? So one can understand how a young child might ascribe this type of reverential fear to his mother and father. He knows that if he disobeys them, he will be punished. But how does an adult fear his mother and father? The concept is difficult for us because we do not live in a society where parents are honored, sadly. If we honored our parents as the Bible tells us to, we would fear their disapproval. We would consult them in all matters and, to the best of our ability, let their counsel guide us. Contradicting one's parents, interrupting their conversations, arguing with them, referring to them by their names, and speaking sarcastically or disrespectfully to them as if they were one's peers are all behaviors that demonstrate a lack of reverence. An adult child living on his own might not be beholden to obey his parents any longer, but he is not free to disregard them either. The people of God are not to live like rebellious teenagers. We are holy. We are different. Our teens are to respect us and reverently fear us, and we are to do the same for our parents. Working for success. Now when you reap the harvest of our land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leviticus 19:9. If you want a business venture to be successful, you need to squeeze every ounce of potential profit out of your production. That's just good business sense, right? But the Bible disagrees. The Torah gives specific commandments for Jewish farmers practicing agriculture in the land of Israel. God tells the farmer not to harvest the grain from the corners of his field. He tells the harvesters not to go over the crop a second time to capture produce they might have missed on the first pass. He tells husbandmen not to gather the fruit that falls from their vineyards and orchards on its own accord. Instead, they are to leave all the secondary produce for the poor, the needy, and the stranger to collect. The businessman who conducts his operation in keeping with these biblical principles is not concerned only about his own personal success, he is concerned about the success of others as well. So it's not easy to leave the corner of a field unharvested, especially when you might be having trouble making ends meet yourself. How did the farmer find the resolve to follow this instruction? He had only to remember that the land did not really belong to him. He was only a sharecropper, so to speak, working the soil on God's land. In what way do these laws contribute to holiness? So James, the brother of the Master, writes, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress." James 1:27. To be a holy people, we need to show compassion for the unprivileged in our midst. These laws provide the background for the story of Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David. Ruth was a destitute widow, living alone with her widowed mother-in-law Naomi. When the wheat was ready for harvest around Bethlehem, Ruth went out with other poor women of the community to glean in the fields. She followed after the harvesters, picking up dropped sheaves and gathering the remnants that had been left behind. Gleaning is still permitted by law in modern Israel. Poor people are helped by it because they are permitted to pick as much fruit of the trees or from the ground as is needed when they walk through a field or an orchard. These laws have application outside of their agriculture. We all have fields that we work in. The idea is to leave a generous margin for the needs of others. And the sages point out that the Torah does not mandate how large the corners of the fields have to be. So a generous man might leave large corners standing for the gleaners, while a stingy man might decide that a single stalk or two at a corner of each field is sufficient. In both cases, the man's field made a statement about his heart. And this is not a story of our friend, which we like to include in our teachings, as we have many of these stories. His father gave charity so generously that he was audited by the IRS. The government did not believe a person would intentionally give away more than a quarter of his annual income. But that was the corner of his father's field. He not only gave generously of his money, he gave of his time. So when our friend was a boy, his father worked full-time running a small-town newspaper and printing office. In addition, he served as pastor and volunteered in the ministry. Though his time was always precious and scarce, he would set everything aside for the needs of others. A man might walk into the newspaper office and just need to talk. His father would take the time to talk. A phone call from a man whose marriage was in trouble would necessitate stopping the presses. Perhaps the newspaper business was not as successful as it could have been if his father had shut out these distractions. But the success of his labors for the kingdom would have been impaired if he had. Honesty. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. Leviticus 19:11. Have you ever been ripped off by a religious person? It's not surprising when we are cheated by people of the world, but it is disconcerting when a professing Christian or an observant Jew deceives or financially abuses us. We expect more from the religious person than a secular person. We assume that the religious person will conduct his affairs in concert with his moral values. That makes the religious person different from the secular person. That's what being holy is all about. The Torah says that when a religious person conducts himself without integrity, he profanes the name of God. The word profane is the opposite of the word holy. Holy means set apart. Profane means common and ordinary. When a religious person conducts himself no differently than the common, ordinary people around him, he makes God look common and ordinary too. He damages God's reputation. An unbeliever who steals, deceives, lies, perjures, and swindles is unremarkable. But when a believer acts that way, he disgraces the faith and gives the opportunity for unbelievers to say, "You see, he's just like us. I knew there was no substance to his God or his religion." The sages understood the commandment, "You shall not oppress your neighbor nor rob him," in Leviticus 19:13, to be a prohibition against dishonest business transactions. So as disciples of Yeshua, obedient to God's Torah, we need to strive for scrupulous honesty, especially in the matters of business. Another story of our friend, he remembers going to an auto dealership with his father. He was trading in his old car and buying a new vehicle. The dealer offered him a price for the old vehicle, but his father considered it momentarily and then said, "You need to know a few things first. The left windshield wiper isn't working, the brakes need to be replaced, and the clutch is acting funny." The dealer looked at him in dismay and declared, "You're not supposed to tell me any of that. No one else does." So on another occasion, long before he was born, his father was in Canada buying tickets for the family to board the train. David was his oldest brother at that time. He had just turned 5 years old. So he was no longer eligible to ride the train for free. When his father offered full fare for David, the ticket agent declared, "That child isn't 5, he goes free." And his father replied, "No, he just turned 5. The agent laughed. "Why didn't you lie about it like everyone else does?" But his father was not everyone else. Cursing the deaf. You shall not curse a deaf man, Leviticus 19:14. So imagine a person who delights in denigrating and insulting a deaf person because he knows the man cannot hear the insults. The knave takes pleasure in the knowledge that others can hear the insults, but the deaf man to whom they are addressed, though he is present in the room, is obvious to the shaming words launched against him. This would be a person of very low character, And it is this kind of behavior that the Torah censors when it says, "You shall not curse a deaf man." Leviticus 19:14. A holy person certainly would not behave that way. But what difference does it make whether the target of our denigration is present or not? When we unleash a verbal assault against a person who cannot hear us just because he happens to be someplace else, it is really not that different from cursing the deaf. The only reason we feel free to speak so casually is that the victim against whom we are speaking cannot hear us. As a matter of holiness, we should not speak negative words about others at all, unless in the form of a rebuke offered directly to them. And we have rarely seen a situation in which nasty words spoken in a private conversation do not eventually float to the ears of the victim. There is some perverse spiritual energy about evil speech that causes it to take on a life of its own. It passes from person to person until it eventually finds its mark, causing wounds and animosity. Though a man may assume that his words will not be repeated, they almost always are. Stumbling blocks. Nora placed a stumbling block before the blind, Leviticus 19:14. Two members of a certain congregation are blind. It is community responsibility to be aware of them and to keep walkways and stairs clear of objects that might cause them to trip. This is also a commandment of the Torah. The Gospels and the epistles often allude to the commandment not to place a stumbling block before the blind. So in Matthew 16:23, Yeshua referred to Peter's misplaced messianic enthusiasm as a stumbling block to his real mission. In Matthew 18:7, the Master referred to temptations and improprieties that cause others to sin as the stumbling blocks. He said it is inevitable that people will stumble, but the worst punishment will be assigned to those who left the stumbling blocks in front of the stumblers. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks, for it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to that man through whom the stumbling block came. Matthew 18:7. So to what kind of stumbling blocks was he referring? He had in view any behavior or negligence of ours that would influence others to sin. So for example, a man takes his family to the movies. There are some brief scenes of nudity and sexual situations, but the man shrugs it off. His young sons, however, are deeply impacted by the images and their hearts are inspired to lust. A teenage boy introduces his peers to inappropriate music. A woman decides to wear seductively enticing clothing. A school teacher discourages his students from the path of faith. A Bible teacher dismisses some of the commandments as irrelevant because he is personally uncomfortable with it. There are many ways that we cause others to stumble. In the days of the apostles, the question of food sacrificed to idols was a big issue. Paul advocated for allowing food that might have been sacrificed to an idol so long as the matter was in doubt as to whether the food had been offered to an idol. However, he knew this policy might cause others to assume that it was all right to eat food that definitely had been sacrificed to idols. That is why he warned the Corinthians, saying, "Take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak." 1 Corinthians 8:9. Along similar lines, he told the Roman believers not to put an obstacle or a stumbling block in a brother's way. Romans 14:13. So sometimes our behavior can create stumbling blocks that prevent unbelievers from coming to faith. For example, we may create stumbling blocks that prevent Jewish people from seeing and understanding the truth about Yeshua. When Messianic Jews put on the outward garb of Judaism, like a kippah and tzitzit, but behave in ways inconsistent with Torah and Judaism, such as going out to eat in non-kosher restaurants on the Sabbath day, it is confusing and alarming to the observant Jews. So traditional observant Jews become convinced that Messianic Judaism is just a ruse, a costume show with no real substance, and the Jewish prejudice against Yeshua of Nazareth are confirmed. The only stumbling block that people should have to get over to find the gospel is the stumbling block of the death and the resurrection of Messiah himself. We preach Messiah crucified, to Jews a stumbling block, and to Gentiles foolishness. And that's in 1 Corinthians 1:23. Given the benefit of the doubt, you are to judge your neighbor fairly. Leviticus 19:15. So the commandment to judge one's neighbors fairly is interpreted in Judaism to mean given the benefit of the doubt. Our normal reaction is to do just the opposite. When we observe someone else's behavior or hear about something a person said, we tend to assume the worst. But why not assume the best? Given the benefit of the doubt is a fine art. It requires us to change the way we assess life. For example, suppose a person is late for an appointment. You might assume that his tardiness is a result of poor planning and irresponsibility on his part. Or you might assume that he had the best of the intentions but met with unavoidable circumstances that forced a delay. Learning to extend the benefit of the doubt in every situation can transform your life. It reduces stress, irritation, conflict, and bitterness. The trick to judging your neighbor fairly is remembering that there is always another side of the story. You don't know the whole story. So one person hears about something another congregant did or said and becomes upset. Usually the upset person misunderstood the situation because he did not know the extenuating circumstances. For example, a young teen shows up to Sabbath services dressed like a punk rocker. People are offended, but the offended people do not realize that this boy is struggling with huge issues, a messy divorce between his parents, a custody battle, a long history of abuse and emotional scarring. As a congregational leader, many people see this kind of thing happen all the time. It's easy to feel indignant when you don't know the other side of the story. A person at work gives the man a few curt and unkind words. The man might assume that his colleague is a mean-spirited and a nasty person. But how does that help? It's better to assume that the coworker is having a bad day or that he is under a lot of stress and did not mean to be unkind. On his way home from work, the man is cut off in traffic by another driver. The man might assume that the driver is an idiot who should not be allowed behind the wheel. But how does that help? Maybe the person is an idiot. So what? A better assumption is to suppose that the person is in a hurry and simply did not see him. Something that could happen to any driver. The man comes home from work and is disappointed to find the house in disarray and no dinner prepared. He thinks, I suppose my wife was at the phone all day gabbing with her friends. Maybe she was, but how does that help? It's healthier for him to remember that his wife may have had any number of unforeseen problems and interruptions throughout the day. Perhaps she was tied up with helping someone else, or perhaps she was not feeling well. What would happen if rather than cheating her, he said, you probably had a hard day. How would you like to go out to eat? Extending the benefit of the doubt can transform every relationship we have. And more important, it can transform us. A person who refuses to jump to conclusions but always insists on giving others the benefit of the doubt will stand out as a different kind of human being. And that's what holiness means. The slanderer. You shall not go out as a slanderer among your people, and you are not to act against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:16. So people assume that so long as the information is true, it's not gossip or slander. We come up with all sorts of rationalizations to excuse evil speech. I hear religious people preface their ugly words by saying, I'm only telling you this so you can pray about it. In the church, sharing is a code word for gossip and slander. I'm not sure if I should share this with you, but I just thought you should know. And the words that follow amount to some type of character assassination. In Messianic Jewish contexts, I often hear someone say, I don't know if this is Lashon Hara, evil tongue, or not, but, and then divulge some juicy morsel of gossip or grumbling. If you don't know whether it is Lashon Hara or not, do not say it. The Hebrew word for slanderer is rahil. The root word rahal refers to trafficking up and down as a peddler. A gossip is like a peddler, looking for customers and selling his wares to anyone who will buy them. Do not be a customer. The Torah says that slander is equivalent to acting against the life of your neighbor, Leviticus 19:16. The Master developed this concept farther by comparing hatred and disparaging words to murder. Perhaps the word's form of gossip occurs when a person relates unkind words back to the person against whom they were originally directed. For example, Reuben tells Levi some nasty things about Shimon. Levi is already guilty for listening to the slanderer, but he compounds his sin by telling Shimon about the matter. He says, Shimon, do you know what Reuben said about you? By bringing that matter to Shimon's attention, he makes Shimon and Reuben into enemies, and Levi is responsible for the ensuing animosity. A person who refuses to speak disparagingly of others is certainly unusual. Such a person is set apart from the crowd. That's what it means to be holy. The laws of proper speech are crucial matters of holiness, but getting the tongue under control is the most difficult thing a person can do. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. And we see that in James 3:2 as well as 8. Storing bitterness. You shall not hate your fellow countryman in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but you shall not incur sin because of him. And that's in Leviticus 19:17. The Torah forbids us from hating one another. Think of how the history of religion might have been different if this law had been observed by God's people. The Talmud teaches that the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. The world we live in would be a different place today if religious people refused to allow hatred to enter their relationships. Why should Christians perpetuate their feuds and pass them from generation to generation? How can the followers of Yeshua call themselves his followers yet hate others who also follow him? Oftentimes, when a person insults us or hurts us, we choose to internalize the offense. Rather than going to the person and working things out, which might be awkward and uncomfortable, we prefer to let the matter smolder. That's how hatred begins. The solution is to forgive the person who has offended us. If some correction is necessary, it should be done face to face in humility and kindness. Sometimes a brother or sister falls into transgression. In most cases, the best course of action on our part is to look the other way. God has not appointed us to be the policemen over one another. Instead, we should assume the best. We should believe that the person will repent and perhaps already has repented, or perhaps the person did not know that the transgressions was a sin. If the sin is egregious and persistent, it may become necessary to bring a rebuke. The Torah says you may surely reprove your neighbor, Leviticus 19:17. But how is this reproving to be done? Yeshua teaches that if it is necessary to rebuke a brother or sister, a man should discreetly go to him in private. Reason with him and try to convince him to repent. If the sinner will not listen, the man should return with another brother as a witness, and together they should privately reason with the sinner and try to convince him to repent. If he refuses to listen, he is to be brought to the elders of the community. If he refuses to listen to the elders, he is to be put out of the community of believers. Bitterness and hatred are common, but holiness is the opposite of the common. grudges and vengeance. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. Revenge is a privilege not bequeathed to the people of God. When someone wrongs us, we are not allowed to return evil with evil. This places us at the distinct disadvantage by the world's standards. What are we supposed to do when we are wronged? The Apostle Paul teaches us that we are overcome evil with good. We must return insults with kindness, curses with blessings. Paul says, never pay back evil for evil to anyone. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. And that's in Romans 12:17-18. This sounds like a recipe for injustice. It invites people to abuse us and take advantage of us. But Paul does not exclude vengeance and justice. He simply instructs us not to take it into our hands. If there is to be some sort of retribution, let it come from God. He says, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. Romans 12:19. This can be compared to two children fighting in a sandbox. The first child throws sand in the second child's face. The second child could return the gesture by throwing the sand back, or he could wait for mom to intervene. If he throws sand back, he has stopped to his siblings' level and loses the moral high ground. Both children are now sand throwers. Neither is better than the other. Moreover, both are liable for punishment. If the second child waits for justice to proceed from his mother, he retains the moral high ground and goes unpunished. His sibling will receive discipline that is probably more severe than the sand-in-the-face action. This is the approach Paul recommends. So if someone says something nasty about you, and you hear about it and respond by saying something nasty in return, you and the other person are both in the wrong. A better option is to take the moral high ground and leave the matter with the Almighty, who judges the universe in fairness. That is the path of real faith. When we take matters into our own hands, we betray a lack of faith. We feel we need to avenge ourselves because we don't trust God to work out the situation. Paul does recommend a backward type of revenge. He says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. We are overcome by evil when we return it. When we repay evil with evil, we become evil. So Paul recommends repaying evil with good, and he quotes a proverb to demonstrate the efficiency of this approach. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. And that's in Proverbs 25:21-22. Golden rule. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. So Yeshua taught, in everything therefore treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the Torah and the prophets. And we see that in Matthew 7:12. This saying of the Master is sometimes called the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is actually derived directly from the Torah. It is the Master's paraphrase of Leviticus 19:18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Yeshua taught the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself should be coupled with the commandment to love God as expressed in Deuteronomy 6:5. He says that these two commandments, to love God and to love one's neighbor, are the two great pillars of Torah. He says all the Torah and the prophets hang on these two commandments, Matthew 22:40. Paul quotes this teaching of the Master, saying, if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, from Leviticus 21:19, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Paul repeats the teaching of Galatians in the Galatians 5:14 when he says the whole Torah is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So James the Righteous, the brother of the Master, refers to Leviticus 21:19 as the royal law of the Torah. If, however, you are fulfilling the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing well. And that's in James 2:8. A story from the Talmud, the man who stood on one foot. This is a very good story. Maybe one of you heard this. But what does it mean to love one neighbor as oneself? How do we love our neighbors in practical terms? The question brings to mind the story of Rabbi Hillel and the would-be proselyte who stood on one foot. The following is a cited story that appears in the Talmud. So it goes like this. On another occasion, a certain Gentile came to Shammai and said to him, "Make me into a Jewish convert, but teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot." Immediately Shammai drove him away with the measuring stick which was in his hand. When the same Gentile went before Hillel with the same proposition, Hillel said to him, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah, while the rest is commentary on it. Now go and study it." And you can find it in B Shabbat 3IA, or 31a, sorry. Rabbi Hillel understood that the entire Torah can be summarized in the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. But he also understood that such a broad and idealistic ethical charge could lack practical application. So rather than tell the man, "Love your neighbor as yourself," he put it in the practical terms and he said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." Now, Yeshua taught a generation after Rabbi Hillel and built upon the teaching of Rabbi Hillel. He related the same teaching but inverted it. He said, "Treat people the same way you want them to treat you," Matthew 7:12. This is the practical application of the commandment of loving one neighbor as yourself. And in Luke 6, Yeshua expounds upon this teaching with further insights and practical applications. It says, "Treat others the same way you want them to treat you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount." And we'll go a little bit deeper into love the stranger as yourself. So Yeshua teaching in Luke 6 parallel, he's saying in Matthew 5 about loving enemies, praying for persecutors, and greeting strangers. This is also derived directly from the Torah. So according to the laws of holiness, not only is it a commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, it is also a commandment to love the stranger as yourself. You shall love him as yourself, Leviticus 19:34. So the Torah says regarding strangers, the master incorporates this commandment into his teaching about love. It is no great merit for a man to greet his own brother or show kindness to his close friend, but to greet a stranger or to show kindness to an enemy is exceptional. That kind of behavior is abnormal for humanity, but for disciples of Yeshua, it should be normal. We are supposed to be abnormal. Yeshua tells us that when we show this type of kindness and impartiality to others, bestowing goodness upon both those who we love and those we do not naturally love, we are emulating God. So anyone would lend to another so long as he expected to get the money back. There is no merit in that kind of generosity. If you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount, and that's in Luke 6:34. This is not just speaking about money, it's speaking about the way we treat people. When we show kindness to decent people, we expect them to show kindness in return. If we treat someone with respect, we expect them to treat us with respect. We are hurt and angry when the kindness, the goodness, and the respect that we have shown to others is not returned to us. For example, imagine you take notice of a family who is in need of financial assistance. In the spirit of generosity, you buy groceries, which you drop off at their home. but instead of gratitude, they repay you with indifference, even having the audacity to complain that they don't care for the vegetables you brought. And next time, could you please include some more breakfast cereals? Not so much as a thank you. If that happened, you would feel put out. Who wouldn't? But the Master tells us that we are to give to others without anticipating repayment, and even gratitude and simple decency is a form of repayment. It says, love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. That's in Luke 6:35. So to be the kind person who truly gives simply for the sake of giving, who shows kindness to those who are unkind, who shows goodness to those who are not good, who shows love even to an enemy, is the high calling of discipleship. This is the path of the Master. It sets apart his approach to Torah. We often glibly cite the golden rule, but how often do we struggle with the implication of Yeshua's words? As I observe others and myself, I am convinced that we have hardly even made an effort to fulfill the Master's charge. We greet those who greet us, show kindness to our brothers, lend to those we expect to repay us, and show kindness to those who return kindness. But when do we love the unlovable? When someone does us wrong, we want to see that wrong avenged, if only to make that person apologize. Yeshua teaches us to be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Luke 6:36. This is what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. We are always merciful with ourselves, quick to forgive and quick to forget. We excuse our own bad behavior and move on. Yeshua teaches us to show to others that same kind of mercy that we are accustomed to show in ourselves. It says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. And do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. Luke 6:37. Gray hair. You shall rise up before the grave-headed and honor the aged, and you shall revere your God. I am the Lord. And that's in Leviticus 19:32. Another story from our friend. So on Shabbat afternoon, he was enjoying some fellowship with one of the couples who attended their Sabbath fellowship. They are the newlyweds in their early 20s. So the husband took a guess at his age and overestimated by about 10 years. When his wife realized her husband's mistake, she was afraid that he would be offended. In their culture, she explained, age is an honor, but in American culture, everyone wants to be young. And he replied that he was not in the least offended because Torah culture also values age over youth. So the popular culture idealizes youth. Torah culture idolizes gray hair and the wisdom earned through the years. Extra honor is accorded to the venerable scholar. So the elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. That's 1 Timothy 5:17. The Torah commands us to rise in the presence of the gray-headed and to accord honor to elders. The commandment of rising before the elderly and showing respect for the aged is tied to the commandment to revere God. When we respect our seniors, it is ascribed to us as reverence for God. If we are unable to honor our seniors, neither will we find reverence for God within us. So imagine a culture where the young people stood up from their chairs when their seniors entered the room. Imagine a culture where, rather than impotent disrespect for the elderly, children accorded them honor and admiration on account of their years and wisdom. That's the way it's supposed to be in the Torah culture. We are to be a holy people. Abortion and sexual immorality. You shall also say to the sons of Israel, any man from the sons of Israel or from the aliens sojourning in Israel who gives any of his offspring to Moloch shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. Leviticus 22. So Leviticus 20 discusses the sins of giving one's children to the pagan god Moloch and their sins of sexual immorality. It appears that giving one's child to Moloch was some sort of human sacrifice. Leviticus 18 also discusses giving children to the Moloch in conjunction with prohibition on sexual immorality. So the sacrifice of the children to Moloch and the abominable forms of sexual immorality mentioned in the chapter were practiced by the Canaanites, so God warned Israel not to fall into those ways when they entered Canaan. There is a connection between sacrificing children to Moloch and sexual immorality. God intended sexuality to be primarily about reproduction. It is an intimate gesture between husband and wife, but it is primarily designed for making babies. Sexual immorality abuses and twists that natural outcome. Incest results in genetic damage. Sexually transmitted diseases result in infertility and sickness. Homosexuality misdirects the sexual impulse. It seems the real losers from the sexual immorality are the children who are born out of wedlock, the children who are never conceived, and the children who are conceived and aborted. So sexual immorality is at odds with a healthy human reproduction, and a sexually promiscuous society sees children as disposable. In the popular culture, abortion is rampant, largely for the sake of sustaining sexual immorality. One might say that we are sacrificing our children to Moloch at the abortion clinics. The Bible never comes right out and says that abortion is wrong. Some things should just be obvious. If it is wrong to kill a person after he is born, it is wrong to kill a person before he is born. Nevertheless, just in case that was not clear enough for the early Gentile believers, the Didache again makes it explicit in a passage that sounds like a summary of Leviticus 20. It says this: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not practice pederasty, do not commit sexual immorality, do not steal, do not practice magic, do not use potions, do not murder children through abortion, nor kill them after they have been born. And you can find that in Didache 2:2. So abortion is a crime against the mother and her child. It is also a heart-rending tragedy. And we recently read an amazing story from Israel that helps place the gift of human life in perspective. An IDF soldier named Yoni was shot by a sniper while stationed near Hebron. A fellow soldier came to his assistance and staunched the bleeding with his hands while calling for help. The soldier stayed with Yoni until he was safely delivered to the hospital in Beersheba. Yoni's parents wanted to thank the soldier who had saved their son's life, but the IDF could not find the records to track down the hero's name. Yoni's parents owned a grocery store, so they put up a sign in the store describing how their son's life had been saved and asking for information about the identity of a mysterious soldier. In Israel, it seems that everyone knows everyone, so the sign had a fair chance of working. A year later, a woman was shopping when she noticed the sign and recognized the story. She took Yoni's mother aside and said, "Look at me. You don't remember me?" She said, "No, I'm sorry." Yoni's mother responded, "Did we meet before?" 20 years ago, I lived around here and came by all the time to buy milk and bread. One day you noticed that I looked really down, and you asked me why, and I confided it in you. I told you I was going through a difficult time. And on top of that, I was pregnant and planning to have an abortion. You talked me out of it. So you see, God paid you back for your kindness. What do you mean? Asked Yodi's mother. I had a son 20 years ago because you told me to think twice before having an abortion, she explained. My beloved Yar wouldn't have been born if not for you. When he grew up, he saved your son's, Yodi's life. He's the one you're looking for. It's a very, very emotional story, especially to me. But that's it for today, guys. Once again, thank you for watching. If this message blessed you, please like the video and subscribe. It does help the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments for daily inspiration and prayer. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.